That's fantastic. Andrew, your mic volume is a little quiet. Would you mind turning it up a bit if you can?
Yeah, it really works if I have it close to my face.
Oh, okay, that's much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just have you do that when it's your turn to talk.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Elizabeth Hoxie, and I'm the Science Department Chair here at Colby, and I also teach a number of different classes in the Science and the Theology Department, including our new health course. And I'm joined by Dr. Meinert, who is a clinical psychologist in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and also a dear friend of our family. And we also have Andrew Jacobs, who was one of my health students this year, who very kindly agreed to take some time out of from his final exam studying to be here with us and to share a little bit about something he learned this year in health class. Um, so what I'll do is I'm going to begin with a little overview of our health curriculum and especially the mental health component of the health curriculum and how we cover that in class. And then Andrew and I will be talking about some of the saints, the lives of the saints who struggled with mental illness and what that looked like in their lives. And then Courtney and I will take questions. So if you have any questions about the curriculum, I'm happy to answer those. And then Dr. Meinert can answer anything related to mental health care. So I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll begin. Have to bear with me. I'm very familiar.
Matthew's MacBook Pro disconnected.
All right, can everybody see my screen? Looking good? Okay. All right, so the Kolbe Health curriculum was a new addition this year, and it came about because we have had a lot of requests over the years from parents for a health program. A lot of states have a requirement that students take a health class sometime in their high school years, and so it made sense for us to add that to our curriculum. But it also fits very well with our whole approach to education. One of the hallmarks of an Ignatian pedagogy is this idea of cura personalis, or care for the whole person. And so in health class and in the health curriculum, the focus is, okay, how do we do that? How do we care for the whole person, for the mind and the body and for the soul? And then we started working on the curriculum about a year ago, and COVID hit, and this was our first year teaching the health class in the online setting. And it just, I think, really met a need for our students and for our families to be thinking about and to be talking about what it means to be healthy, to be mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically healthy, socially healthy, all within the context of this global stressor, an event that left so many families kind of reeling and struggling a little bit. So it really felt like providential timing that this was our first year with the health course. So at the beginning of the year with the students, one of the things that we talk about is the idea of a health pyramid. And the pyramid that's in the textbook is a little bit different because they leave out the spiritual component to it. So we kind of have to add it into the health pyramid. But we talk about this idea that, we're not just bodies. So when you bring up the topic of health, most people are thinking about things like diet and nutrition and exercise, and all of that is an important component of health. But that's just one aspect. That's the physical aspect of health. Equally important is social health, our relationships and interactions with others, our mental and emotional health, and then spiritual health as well. We aren't just bodies, we aren't just souls, we are our bodies, we are our souls, we're embodied. And there's this close and not just close, but inseparable unity between body and soul. And so every aspect of our health is important and essential. So as far as the mental and emotional health goes, that comes up a number of times during the year in a couple of different contexts. At the beginning of the year, we talk about what good mental and emotional health looks like and what it means to start to develop a sense of identity, what the characteristics of identity are, and how you go about developing a positive identity. We talk about self-esteem and the idea of resilience. And then as we go through the year, we talk about managing stress. So everybody has stressors in their life. That's unavoidable. It's just part of living is dealing with stress. For high schoolers, a lot of that stress comes from school. So we talk about some different ways to manage stress in healthful ways. Really key for high schoolers, I think, is usually time management. Time management helps a lot with the academic stress, especially, and just kind of finding balance between the work that we do and the way that we live. And I went to a Benedictine college, as did Dr. Meinert. So the ora et labora, the work and the prayer. How do we manage our work and our prayer life and our spiritual life? And one of the resources I like to share with the students is the idea of a sacramental pause. So this comes from Dr. Greg Bottero, who wrote the book, The Mindful Catholic, and I have a link to his website at the end of this presentation. But the sacramental pause is just this idea of taking a moment to be mindful of God's presence. And so there's lots of different, techniques and so on that can be used for stress management. So that's one of the things that we spend a little time on with the students. And then a little later on the year, we talk about emotions. So a lot of times I think people operate under the supposition that negative emotions are a bad thing, and that's just not the case. The church talks about emotions or the passions, feelings, as being morally neutral and part of our human experience. And so all of us are challenged by difficult emotions. All of us experience sadness and anger and disappointment and grief. And I like this quote from the Catechism, which says that strong feelings are not decisive for morality or for the holiness of the person. They're simply the inexhaustible reservoir of images and affections in which the moral life is expressed. And I think that's really abundantly clear in the lives of the saints. You read about these different saints, and some of them really had, they're just strong emotions. There's a story about Saint Jerome that he struggled with his temper to the extent that when he left Rome, all the other priests in Rome rejoiced because they were so tired of his irritability, his crankiness, and his short-temperedness. So all of us, to one extent or another, experience emotion, and the emotion itself is not bad. Um, feelings are what they are, but part of the challenge for us is to learn how to handle those emotions in a mature way. And so in the health class, we talk about, okay, what does a healthy expression of emotion look like, and how can those emotions be communicated, and how can they become an impetus for some good work. The emotions themselves are morally neutral, but what we do with them, that's the vice or that's the virtue. If you're somebody who does experience those, maybe you have a hot temper, maybe you are easily depressed or discouraged, or maybe you are somebody who is naturally a very joyful person, and all of that is part of our personality, but all of that can be the impetus for whatever good work God intends in your life. Um, and then a couple chapters later, so about mid-semester, we talk about mental illness. So we go through kind of the symptoms of a number of different mental health disorders, and how the disorders are diagnosed and what the treatment options are. And then we also talk about the idea of stigma. So I tell the students that the word stigma, we use the same word for saints who have the stigmata. It has the same root. It means wound, and so mental illness is a woundedness of the mind, just like a physical illness is a woundedness of the body. And unfortunately, mental illness is stigmatized quite a bit in our culture. But the church's perspective, and as we see in the lives of the saints, nobody is exempt from suffering. Everybody experiences in their life some suffering. And so the saints who suffered from mental illness to one degree or another, their sanctity wasn't despite their illness, it was in the way that they embrace that particular cross. And none of us are exempt from that. We all have our crosses, and we're all called to embrace them. And that's where our holiness lies. Um, so what I want to do is go through a couple of different saints that we talked about. The students were given a project to research saints who struggled with mental illness. And my student Andrew here is going to present about one of them, and then I'll tell you a few other stories to go along with it. So go ahead, Andrew, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Perfect. Hello, my name is Andrew Jacobs, and I'm finishing up my freshman year of high school. I'm 15 years old, so I took the health class my first year of high school, and I really enjoyed it. Um, the saint that I was given, the saint that I picked was Saint Louis Martin. He was the father of Saint Therese of Lisieux, and this is a little bit about what I wrote about him and what he struggled with. So St. Louis Martin was a total family man, which involved love for stories, songs, crafts, and the outdoors. However, all good things come with downsides. St. Louis Martin was born and raised into a family of soldiers in northern France, which meant military life for the young man. Once he came to the age to fight, he was sent off to war, where he was taught discipline and order. After finishing his term in France, in the French army, he settled in Alcon in France, where he strove to be a monk. But the monastery found his Latin intolerable, so they turned him away. After being rejected by the monastery, he found a lovely, unwedded young woman, to which he decided to marry. He and his wife Zélie had 9 children, of only 5 who made it into adulthood. All of those 5 were girls. This is where his love for reading, stories, and crafts, etc., comes in. He taught his daughters all there was to know about God, the outdoors, and how to grow up, living a life that would glorify God. His daughters were instructed so well in their faith that they all wanted to become nuns and join a convent to serve God all their life. Therese, St. Louis's favorite daughter, even wanted to join the convent at a young age, leaving Louis with only his wife. Shortly after Therese left, cancer took the love of his life to heaven to be with God, leaving Louis a very lonely man. With the loss of his wife coming at such a hard time in his life, catastrophic pitfalls ensued for him. Firstly, it was nothing severe. Then it slowly became more and more. So much so that that at one point he ran 25 miles away from his home. not knowing where or who he was. After such a bad case of depression and dementia and impediment in his daily life, his family was humiliated. His family finally induced him into Le Bon Sauveur Asylum in France, where he had many strokes and cerebral arteriosclerosis. During, during his early life, he had offered himself on the altar of Christ in war and wanted to suffer just like him. And these sufferings that he endured in the asylum and in his after his daughters left was the sufferings that he endured like Christ, exactly what he wanted to happen to him. He and his wife Zélie were canonized by Pope Francis in 2015 as the first couple to be canonized saints. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was fantastic. I learned a lot from reading your paper in particular. I knew that mental health was kind of an issue in St. Teresa's family in general, but I didn't know about St. Louis, the later part of his life and his committal into the asylum until I read your paper. So I learned a lot from you. Thank you. A couple of other saints that we have on the slide here are St. Ignatius, who we love, of course, at Colby. And St. Ignatius, part of his story was that he was injured in battle, and it seems that he suffered from PTSD as a result of that, and also depression. And actually, as he came into the faith and really and started to learn and to come into relationship with the Lord, it seems like his depression actually got worse and not better. One of the students wrote about him, and one of the things that they found is that sometimes St. Ignatius is given credit for being among the first to practice cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which I can certainly see now that I look back at his writings, and you can definitely see that idea that the emotions and behaviors are caused by our thoughts and beliefs. So that was an interesting take on his life. I have St. Elizabeth Ann Seton here as well. She had at least three major depressive episodes in her life following several tragedies. One of the things that I was kind of surprised to learn as I started researching mental illness and the saints is that quite a few of them suffered from suicidal ideation along with whatever their mental illness was. And she was one of them. So when she was a teenager, she experienced her first depressive episode and she wrote about it. And she contemplated committing suicide. Her father was a physician, and she thought about overdosing on opioids that he had available. And thank God she didn't. But that was part of her experience and part of her cross. I have a picture of Saint Jane de Chantal, good friend of Saint Francis de Sales. She suffered from depression and anxiety, and she found that the practice of charity helped alleviate the symptoms of her depression, but she was never cured of it. It was something that she carried with her for her entire life. St. Albert was quite a guy. He is pictured at the bottom in the middle here, and behind him is one of his most famous paintings, Ecce Homo. So he had quite the life. He was homeschooled by his aunt, I believe. So he was one of 8 children. He grew up in extreme poverty, but he was homeschooled. Later on in life, he got involved in political activism and ultimately got hit by a Russian grenade and had his leg amputated. But after all of that, he started painting, and he was a very talented painter and started to gain fame quite quickly. And it was the fame and that constant exposure that sent him into a depressive state. And it was so severe that he was hospitalized for his depression. And he's another saint who never experienced healing from his depression. It was something that he carried with him. He tried to join a religious order, but anxiety kept him from that. And so he left, and he ended up in another religious community. But it was an ongoing battle for him. Let's see, who else do we have? Oh, Saint Mary Magdalene de Pazzi is up at the top left, and she is invoked as patroness of individuals who are suffering from eating disorders. We can't go back and diagnose retrospectively, but it does seem from her life that she had some of the symptoms, or a lot of the symptoms actually, of somebody with bulimia nervosa. So these are just a handful of saints. My students came up with quite a few, and I'd really encourage you, if you haven't already, to look into the lives of the saints. and see who struggled and see who suffered. The statistic, I believe, is that 1 in 4 suffer from mental illness to some degree or another. So all of us are touched by that, whether it's us individually or family members, or, you know, mental illness is very pervasive. And so it's very helpful and encouraging, I think, to see that mental illness is part of the story of the saints too. And like I said, they didn't become holy in spite of this particular cross. They became holy by embracing the cross of mental illness in their life. Oh, one I forgot here, and I shouldn't skip over him. St. Oscar Romero is up at the top in the middle. And he's a relatively modern saint. And his story reflects that he suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder and scrupulosity, and he sought psychotherapy. So that's the other thing that I really stress with the students in health class is that mental illness, you know, we should seek treatment for mental illness just like we would for any other illness. In Catholicism, we talk all the time about this beautiful relationship between faith and science, faith and reason. And so medicine is God's gift to us and the gift of reason. And so we should absolutely seek treatment for illness of any kind, as St. Oscar Romero did. I have a couple of resources that myself and Dr. Minard find useful, not an exhaustive list in the least bit, but this might be helpful to you, especially the Catholic Psych and the Catholic Counselors. These are good websites if you are looking for therapy or counseling of some sort to connect with Catholic professionals in the field. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions. Look and see if there's any in the chat box. All right, so if you have any questions for us, go ahead and put this in the chat box. And in the meantime, I am going to ask Dr. Minard, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about, you know, if parents have a child who they think would benefit from counseling or from therapy, what's the process they would follow for that?
Sure. So to sum it up briefly, and then if there's maybe additional questions after that, we can parse it apart a little bit more. But the first thing is to maybe call to mind that it's a relationship more than it is with anything else. You want to have a good relationship with your pediatrician because you see them fairly regularly. You have less of a relationship with maybe a surgeon you go to, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, when you're diving into issues for a full hour together, maybe, you know, several hours over a couple of months as you move through things, you really want to be thinking about that as a relationship. So competency of the professional is good, and you're almost assured that with licensure and that kind of thing, but you want to think about that relationship. And so approaching that, it's very, most clinicians, almost all therapists, counselors, psychologists would have it already built into their approach to spend some time with you as the parent before meeting with the kid, and maybe some time together with the parent and child together, and then sort of breaking off and focusing mostly with the child. So it would not be out of the norm to ask and say, hey, can I meet with you first? I just want to speak frankly as a parent. I want to give you some good background. And you're probably going to get a resounding, yeah, I want to do that anyways. And it is appropriate in that time when you're meeting to sort of say, you know, sort of feel out, hey, this is the way we view the world, the you know, Catholicism or this or that is important to us. Where do you stand on that? How do you feel about that? Is that okay? Is it something that's going to be a good match? And then I usually say, you know, especially if the child's a little bit reluctant, if it's a teenager, if we're in high school, we're a little bit reticent and it's not their idea, three, maybe 4 or 5 sessions together, all told. And if the relationship doesn't seem like it's blossoming, then it might be time to find a different provider. And that may seem relatively short term or a short amount of time to see if that relationship is working. But especially for a teenager who it might not be their idea to go, you want it to be a fresh experience, something where they're going to get some relief fairly early on. And you shouldn't think you're not going to hurt the therapist's feelings, or you shouldn't be hurting the therapist's feelings by saying it's not the right fit. I've got to figure out what's going to be best for my child. It's not the right relationship.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It looks like we have a question from Facebook. Do you recommend this class for 8th grade? I did have some 8th graders in the class this year. As always, you know your child best. So I would say the majority of students in the online class this year were 9th grade and up. I had quite a few 12th graders as well. We do cover some kind of difficult topics in health class, including suicide, as mentioned today. So, it depends very much on the child. One of the things that I do with the class, because I think it's important to bring parents into discussion with their students about various topics as we go through the year, is I provide the students with a weekly discuss and write prompt. And so the discuss and write prompt has some bearing on whatever the content of the lecture was that week or in the coming week. And it's a topic for the parents and the students to talk with each other about before the student writes a prompt or a response to the prompt for the class. And I provide resources as well to kind of try and help guide the conversation. So in the health class, we always, want our parents to be involved in classes, but I think even more with the health class, it's really important that the parents be closely walking with the student as they move through the curriculum. All right, I don't see any other questions at this point. I guess, Dr. Meinert, I have another question for you. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe some warning signs or signals that parents might be on the lookout for in their teens that would indicate that it's really time to get some professional help for them.
Sure, sure. I liked how you started your response to the question that you just answered in terms of your child best. So shifts, changes, and are we moody by nature in our teenage years? Yeah, most of us are, and most of us will get through that just fine. But anything that sets off your alerts is, oh wow, this is a major shift for my child, especially self-isolation, moving away from the friend group or the friends that they were talking about. And then there's if you're a little bit more worried about maybe suicide in particular, since that topic was brought up, anything where it's start to give away items or start to just sort of maybe like a little bit of we call it flattening of affect, which means like it's not even a sadness or a tearfulness or a drama or a mood shiftiness, just sort of like a removal of feelings, just a disinterested, disaffected, disconnected kind of, they'll call it anhedonia sometimes. I'm not getting pleasure from anything. I'm just kind of numbed out. That would be a sign or a signal that maybe it's time to look at things. And especially if these were to last a week or so or more, by definition, a depressive episode takes 2 or more weeks to be reaching that diagnostic level. But if they're feeling that way for a week straight and they haven't been able to just sort of lift up or pull out of that, then maybe it's time to investigate or ask about what the child might want to do next or what they might want help wise.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful. And then kind of a follow-up question to that. The number of different types of mental health professionals, I think, can be a little overwhelming sometimes. So I was wondering if you could explain maybe a little bit of the difference between what you do as a clinical psychologist versus, a psychiatrist and so on.
Sure. Okay. So a psychiatrist is an MD almost always, and they can prescribe, and so they can someone who's working with them mostly their primary duty, at least where we are currently in the last 20, 50 years or so, is primarily medication management. And you can expect a little bit of therapy and an intensive clinical interview at the first time you meet with a psychiatrist, but most psychiatrists do not do therapy on a regular basis. They come in, oh, what are your symptoms like? Give me a 15-minute kind of update, more than you would hear or meet with another type of doctor, like another type of medical doctor. But ordinarily, it's medication management is their primary role in treatment. And then a psychologist would be almost entirely therapy. There would be very few exceptions. Like maybe Arizona, a couple psychologists may have prescription privileges, but it's a pretty clear and even statement to say that psychologists don't have prescription writing privileges. And so we do therapy and psychological assessments. And then counselors is sort of a general term. It can include psychologists sometimes, but more often it includes master level providers and licensed clinical social workers and licensed marriage and family therapists. And they have a little bit less training, but they might have much more clinical experience, just depending on where they are in their career. Again, no prescription writing privileges, and they are primarily therapists, primarily counselors.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Are there any questions that you would recommend parents ask as they're trying to figure out if a provider is a good cultural fit for them, as somebody who's going to be respectful, especially of their faith practices and their family?
Mhm, mhm. I would encourage people to be direct. The training right now for any level of therapist or psychologist is very, very driven by cultural competency, multiculturalism. And so they're used to hearing those terms, and they've studied an awful lot about it. And for most of them, that's very important. Now, whether or not they would include Catholicism or Christianity more generally as an area of cultural competence, that's in question. The field, as many fields right now, can be hostile towards the deeper values of our faith. Maybe, oh yeah, we like everyone, and you do you, and kind of thing, until we dig down a little bit, and then they might find us and our value systems to be intolerant of some of theirs and whatnot, and then it can get a little bit more personal. And that's just it's that's tough, but that's tough interpersonally. I don't mean like, oh, that's tough for them. Um, but it's like anything else relationship wise, to be kind of upfront about what your needs are. I think going through word of mouth, if you have trusted friends who say, okay, well, we're working with someone, I think that's a good place to start. I think the two resources that Elizabeth has listed as resources for directories for finding psychologists, I think that's a good idea. There's a Psychology Today, and you could just search that, and that's a whole list of psychologists and counselors and therapists. And very often they'll list spirituality if that's an area of expertise for them. It can be a little bit broader than we might think, but that's a place to start. But more than anything, in that clinical interview, initially meeting them, to just be upfront about how important that is.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I don't see any further questions, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew had to go leave to help clean. And thank you, Dr. Miner, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, certainly. Thank you.
All right.